Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Tech Leaders Launchpad live stream. This is a series of live streams where I get people that are my mentors and coaches to share their experience, their wisdom, and their ideas with you. When I started being a tech leader 15 years ago, there wasn't any support. There weren't the books, the podcasts, the live streams that we have nowadays. And so I had to learn everything the hard way. A lot of my guests have had to learn everything the hard way. And part of what I want to do with this live stream is to help you do the things that we couldn't do, which is learn from the expertise around us. And so with me today, I have Martin. Martin, welcome to the live stream.
Thank you, Andrew. Nice. Thanks for having me, and thanks for staying up in the middle of the night to get me on live stream. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, it's 10 p.m. in Melbourne. Pretty late, but I'm more than happy to have a chat with you, Martin. It's been a long time since we last talked, so like I'm raring for this. You might also notice, dear viewers, that Martin is coming to us over a piece of wet string and two tin cans. Sorry, that's pretty much what we could do in terms of internet right now. I suggest you watch the recording if you are struggling with picking anything up Martin's saying. The recording of this will be as full fidelity as we can possibly make it.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so Martin, I like to start this off with a little bit of an introduction of you, but I'd also like you to go into why this topic is important to you. You know, when I put these live stream suggestions together and I talked to the guests about what they want to talk about, straight away you said this topic was something that was really important to you. So I'd love to know a little bit about your history and your past, but also why this topic especially is important.
Well, I mean, so history and past. Like many of my generation. I turned 40 last year. Uh, I started computers very young. It was like a something about that generation with the consoles and the Nintendo 8-bit came out, and there's this fascination of technology and what it could do. And for me, it was, as much as I loved playing the games, I was more fascinated about trying to figure out, what is it that makes the game? Like, how can you make the game? So I got into programming really early. Like, my parents really went above and beyond to make sure that, I had a computer. Um, and then that kind of launched into a career. I mean, I didn't even get to finish university before I was drafted into a company, and that was a consultancy company. So I started working as a consultant, basically, on delivering projects to government agencies and all sorts of different clients, and eventually made partner in that consultancy. Um, when I sold that, I swore I would never work as a consultant again. I was like, I'm done with this. Consulting, it's been a fun ride, but yeah, I want to work in a product company. I want to do a product. And I decided to run a startup. I should make my own startup. The issue was I knew nothing about building companies or products or startups, and it went terribly bad. And when doing those self-searching exercises, I kind of realized that consulting is what I know. Like, helping other people be great, helping teams be great, that's what I know. So I decided, if this is what I know and I don't like the business, let's try to change the business. Let's try to make that differently. And this is how I started the Trend 37, which is the consultancy that I was a part of for 14 years. We went from 0 to 350 employees, and I just left a couple of months ago, and now I'm doing consulting on my own as a tech leadership consultant and coach. And for me, it's always been this thing. Like, I transitioned into leadership because of necessity, because I founded a company, I was running a company, and there's no way of being like, no, I decide not to do leadership. It kind of just happens to you. And I know that's not how everybody gets into it, but for me, it was out of necessity. And then I started liking it. So I always had this kind of dual track, with one foot in the business, the leadership, the people, and one foot in tech. So this is what I use today when I'm in my clients, because the problems I usually fix for my clients is, when business and the technology is not grooving together. And I mean that in an organizational sense, not in a product sense, because there's a lot of communication issues. And people think that that's just internal stuff. But as we'll see today, that comes through in the product. Like if your organization is not functioning well, your users and customers, they can feel that in the product. And this is why I love this topic so much. Because when we talk about doing projects, that puts the focus on the actual crafting of whatever we're building. So, a successful project is delivered on scope, on budget, and with, the desired quality. It says nothing about a successful project being something that delivers user value or that solves the user's problems. And that's the shift we need in our industry. We need to give back that joy, because in essence, it's the question of who are we as software people? Like what why were we put here? To what means? Like, why do we exist? And it's definitely not to just deliver things on budget, in scope, and with desired quality. We've been put here to help solve users' problems with the help of technology in cool and fascinating ways that excites and makes the user happy. And when you think about it that way, like most people should be excited about being in tech, yet we have a lot of very well paid engineers going to work every morning and just hating what they're doing, because the work has become so much about just sending the next ticket or solving the next issue, fixing the next bug, and we've lost the connection to the value we're providing, the problems we're solving. So this is why I'm so passionate about this. This is why I love this, because I think we need to take that back. I think we need to take that back.
Yeah, I love a lot of that. A mutual friend of ours, Richard Campbell, he has a phrase. I don't know if he coined this phrase, but I love it so much. And the phrase is, the value of software is not in its creation, it's in its utilization. And that focus of we're not here to build something and create it, and that's our job done. The value of the stuff that we do is in the utilization of that software. How is it utilized? Who utilizes it? What are they utilizing it for? What is the value it's bringing to them through that utilization? That's the lens we should be looking at. When I first started my career, I kind of, very similarly to you, I hadn't finished my degree before I got my first job. I did what's called an industrial placement in the UK, where I studied for 2 years, and then they put you in a company for a year to kind of give you that real world experience of being an employee. And so I did that, and the company that I ended up working for said to me at the end of that year, "We don't want you to go back to university. Can you stay on with us and be a full-time employee?" And I was only a year away from finishing my degree, so I was like, no, I've got to finish my degree. But what I ended up doing was working and studying at the same time, which was incredibly stressful, but an incredibly valuable experience. But one of the things that company did, which from the very beginning of my career shaped the way that I think about software development, and this was hugely valuable for me. Every time that I would write some software, every time that I would build out a business process or add something onto the code base, my boss would have me doing that job that the software was meant to help before I wrote that software. So, part of what I was doing was warehouse management. And so in a warehouse, you do stock take, where you basically, you've got an idea of what you've got in your warehouse, but you want to physically check the boxes. You do this once a month, once a quarter, just to make sure that there's similarities between what the software system thinks there is in the warehouse and what there physically is in the warehouse. And so I was writing code to automate the first, automate the stock check. And the first thing my boss said was, "Right, off you go to the warehouse. You're going to go do a stock take." It's just that direct empathy and understanding with the thing that you're helping, the people you're helping, the value that you're providing to those people, that's something that I think we lose a lot of disconnection from.
Mm.
Because, well, I suppose that's a question for you. Why do you think this is happening with the industry? Why do you think this way of thinking isn't more prevalent?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I just need to add on to your story because it used to be like this. I mean, I remember a lot of the first jobs I had was, I got to spend a week with customer support. We're building one of the systems that was being used by customer support, and I got to spend a week with customer support, just sitting, listening into calls, watching them click around in the system. And I think any engineer that does that is going to have a visceral. Any engineer that sits with somebody actually using their system is going to have a visceral reaction to looking at somebody using their system. Like we see how we meant it to be, and then how it's actually used, and that physically hurts us. We go like, ah, no. And it's not until we see that we can understand how misunderstood like a lot of the work we've been doing is. So I think we need to bring a lot of that stuff back. Like people should go and sit with users and visit users and watch the users like, struggle through the UI that they just built. And when we shipped it, we were like, oh, it's fine. It's going to be great. Um, why this is happening? That's a great question. I think there's a lot of factors coming into this. One, I think there's certainly a business factor, which has been kind of focused around the scarcity of software development talent or programmer talent, and specifically software developers. So there's been a drive to kind of optimize the work which is not coding, like optimize a way to work that is not coding. So if you're not actually writing code, like let somebody else handle it. Oh, talking to users, well, somebody else can handle that. Well, doing the tests, somebody else can handle that. Well, deployments, managing the servers, can we outsource that to somebody else so you can write more code, so you can get better at writing code? And that comes from like a deep misunderstanding what the software developer profession is actually about. As we just went through earlier, it's about solving users problems with technology. So the majority of the time we don't spend like bashing the keyboard trying to get more code pushed into production. We sit there and we think about, that's an interesting problem. I wonder how I could solve that. I wonder what the solution for it is. And we think about it, we sketch it out, we think about it some more, maybe write some prototypes, and delete the code, write it again. That's the work. Now, but I think a lot of business folks kind of misunderstood and was like, okay, we're paying these people a lot. Like, how can we optimize for just get them to write as much code as possible, and then get people that we don't pay as much to do a lot of the other work? And then there's just this disconnect. We do the handoffs. There's the overwalls. There's we create all of these situations, and we had some. We had with the emergence of agile in early 2000s. I think there was like a drive towards this. We saw again, the way a lot of principles in the Agile Manifesto, and specifically, if you look, behind the manifesto, if you look not only at the actual values, but you go back into the 12 principles. A lot of that is very customer centric. It is about understanding your customer and coming back to those things. But then again, that was misunderstood with the customer became the product owner. We do you speak to your customers? No, we speak to the product owners, and they speak to the stakeholders, and So again, there became this rift where, yeah, again, good intentions, and it just kind of slipped away. And I think this time around, what's happening with the community this time around, when we talked about product-centric organizations or product-led organizations, we're looking at two things which we previously missed. One is, how do we scale them? Because this was always a problem. It was like, yeah, that's fine. That's going to be fine for your startup with your 10 developers. But how do you scale that to 300, 400, 500 developers? So we're looking at, the organizational models for scaling these types of product organizations. And secondly, we're looking at it from a top-down perspective, saying like, this is actually not going to work if you don't have the whole company on board. Because this is not just a tech problem. This is a problem that involves design and product thinking, and it involves the CEOs being able to articulate what they want with the company in terms of vision and mission, and planting those North Stars in order to align everybody in the same direction. So I think there's a couple of things that are different this time around. And it might just work. I'm seeing a lot of good things coming out of this over the last 2 years, since at least I started talking about
it. Let's dive into that a little bit. You talked about, it needs support from CEO, it needs support from around the whole organization. How do people's responsibilities shift as you make this change? So if we take, say, a very traditional software house, that was maybe came up in the 90s. So, they've got they've got BAs, they've got, product owners, they've got all of these kind of ways we used to do things there. They say they're agile, but in
it.
reality, they're wagile. They still have delivery deadlines and defining scoping documents, but they think they're agile.
Mm.
How do the roles and responsibilities shift as you take a company that's like that towards a product company?
I mean, all of it is different. I think all of it is different, because what we're saying is that management needs to let go of some of the perceived control, and I want to stress perceived control, because a lot of these organizations, there's a lot of reporting going on about everything that's happening. And of course, we still, even if you do pseudo agile, people still talk about, we have some type of scope, and there's some type of budget, and we have deadlines, and there's we have some type of quality we need to deliver. Hopefully they talk about quality. If you don't talk about quality, you definitely know that that's the one that's going to get compromised away. Hopefully they talk about quality, and then they report on that stuff. And then they're always surprised that the project is always late, and the project is always over budget, and the project is always over this and that and that. And then the discussion boils down to who's easiest to blame. Well, of course, it's a software engineer, so the estimates were bad. We're bad at estimating. That's basically you talk to people that don't understand the industry, their number one answer is going to be like, well, the biggest problem with the industry is that we're bad at estimating. Like, no, this is a complex thing, and like trying to figure those things out in advance is really hard. And now comes like the kicker question. Even if you managed to deliver whatever you promised exactly the way it was supposed to be delivered, you put that out into production, will you get the return on that investment that you expected? Like, was your theory correct when you decided to build that thing? For most of the stuff that gets put out, it's not. Like, most of the stuff that gets put out doesn't really create the amount of value that it was expected to be creating. But nobody wants to talk about that, because it's really hard in the structures we have to blame the software engineers or the team for not, for not doing that correctly, because then it would stop higher up in the organization. So basically, the way if you paint a picture of, a very loose picture of how one of these organizations might look, the leader, the CEO, would probably set out a 5-10 year vision for the company, and this vision has to be in terms of how are we trying to change the world, or how are we trying to change our customers' lives. And it has to be bold. It has to be something that is, we're not just we're trying to do the status quo a little bit better. So all of the sudden, you have a CEO, which greatest task is to be a visionary, to think about, 5, 10 years into the future, how are we solving our customers' lives, everything. And now then you have at some point a CPO going like, all right, we have product ranges. So what does that mean for our different product ranges? How is that going to reflect on our different product ranges? What are different product visions we need to have? The product managers need to look at those things, look at the customer research, and see where the customer research then is where the difference between the customer research and the long-term and short-term visions are. And now kind of define those things as problems to solve, and feed those back in the team saying like, hey, these are the problems we're seeing. Given what the CEO said and the CPO said, these are the problems we're seeing with our product. What do you think we can do about it? And now the team has to get creative and has to be innovative. So now it's not just about building the thing, it's actually figuring out what to build. And needless to say that, those teams need to be cross-functional. So otherwise they're not going to have all the skills that are needed in order to be able to build that. Um, in order to be able to build that. So, you need to have those cross-functional teams. Now, once that's pushed to production, it's not only about having an empowerment to do those things as a team. Now you're also accountable for the results. So if it doesn't solve the problem the way you expected it to be solved, that still falls on you. You still have to come back and go like, all right, that was a bad idea. Let's figure out a better way of solving it. Now, just by me explaining that, you can see how a lot of these roles are now very different. You might substitute your classical kind of business analysts for more design heavy competencies that are involved in the team, like design leads and stuff like that. They need to have design thinking, do customer research, things like this. Your project managers will probably be product managers, and I know some people hate this, but I love calling them like the CEO of the product. They kind of have a much wider responsibility, and it's not leading through control. It's leading through influence for a lot of PMs. So they need to be really good at kind of talking to people and convincing people their way of thinking. And then you look at the CTOs or tech leads. They need to think of, how do we use this technology that just came out in the best way to solve these problems? Like, they need to be up on top of all the new tech coming out and try to figure out, all right, customer problem technology, how can we, what can we do with this? And all the engineers, you know, it doesn't really matter how much code they write. They need to be focused on solving the problems of the users again. So there's a lot more interpersonal skills, design thinking, business skills involved, empathy in general. So it's dramatically different. I think, in between somewhere, there's the organizations that do agile well, and they have a much shorter runway to go towards something like this. But if you still in the kind of classical old school organization, the cultural shift is probably going to take you a few years to just get into this way of thinking.
I like that idea of the tech leads, being the people who are looking at what's just come up and what's happened. Like one of the words, when I was at Linktree and we were defining the roles of everybody in the product development process, the words that I chose to use for the tech side was that they oversaw feasibility. But what was really important was that there's two sides to feasibility.
Mm.
They are there to think about why you can't do something, but they are also there to think about what is feasible now that wasn't feasible a year ago. What new
Yes.
thing has just come up that they are the best placed in the team to be able to discover, to be able to link the two things out? Because I think everybody, even engineers themselves, we often think about our role as saying no to crazy ideas, and I think that's just the wrong way of thinking about it. The crazy ideas are only crazy if we do them in a crazy way. You can take a crazy idea and take small slices at it.
I mean, there's good crazy and bad crazy, right? So this came from one. I was actually at a conference. I think it was yesterday, or the day before yesterday, on Tuesday, and one of the panelists was talking about good crazy, bad crazy, and saying like you really need to be good at distinguishing between good crazy and bad crazy, because you have this. If you put all the people on a scale from 1 to 10, the ones and twos are, bad crazy, and then you have everybody in the middle, which is kind of, it's fine, and then at the other end you have the good crazy people. Now the trick is not only to find the crazies, is in order to find, the good crazy, the crazy you can use, and the crazy that's going to, drive you in the right direction. I think that's, I love that, because a lot of the best ideas have been the crazy ideas. And and there's just contrast that, for instance, so LLMs and GPTs coming up now. It's on every tech leads, every CTO's table is, some kind of LLM or GPT project, that they want to do, or need to do, meaning that, maybe their leadership is like, everybody else does LLM, we should do LLM too, do something with the LLM. Now, what I mean the role has to be is like, cool, there's this technology available. Now, let's look at the problems that our users and our customers are having, and see if there's any problem that fits this tech. If there's not, we just have to say like, oh, not this time around. Like, we don't have the problem for, whatever we can do with this tech. So maybe spending a bunch of money on, doing a LLM or GPT project thing right now is not the right course of action, because there's other things we can look into. So it's about saying yes and no, just as you phrased it, but always making sure that the tech we're putting in there is tech we're putting in there in order to solve the user's problems.
Yeah, brilliant. Um, for those of you watching, we're gonna hopefully go into Q&A in a bit, so please post your questions. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitch, post your questions in the chat and we'll get around to answering them. And if they fit the topic of conversation, I'll bring them in before the Q&A. So please do that. Most of my audience, Martin, are people who are in technical leadership roles, or they're aspiring to tech leadership roles. What are the specific challenges for those people, both internal challenges, so the way that they think about their role and the skills that they've got to learn, but also the external challenges of the way they interface with the business and the way they position themselves in the business? What
I'm sorry, I think you dropped off at the end of the question, but I'm getting the challenges for people in tech leadership roles, or leading or leaning towards tech leadership roles, in this way of thinking. I I honestly think that most, if I want to distinguish, here's an important distinction to make, and I'm sure you've made this before, but there's a difference between leading and managing. And I think that the whole idea with it comes down to you trying to figure out if what you're aspiring for is a leadership position, or a leadership, like, or a leader position, or if it's more of a managerial thing. Like, do you want to have people reporting to you? Do you want to be, do those things? That's probably more towards the managerial side of things. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But when I talk about leadership and I talk about technical leadership, for me, it's a way to be able to paint a picture, go first, and then get people to voluntarily follow in that direction. So I think, for me, there's not really a specific challenge with this way of working. If anything, it's easier if you're truly going into the idea of being a leader, because all of a sudden you have more mandate to paint the pictures you want. You can talk to the people that you're leading about, this is what I would like to see for our platform or product or technology or code base or whatever, you can paint that picture and you say, and this is what I am doing about it, and this is where I want you to join on the journey, and how I would like you to be a part of what we're trying to solve. It if you believe in the things that I believe in, come along. This is going to be fun. It's going to be cool. Like what we're doing is, we're going to change whatever the world or the industry that we're working in. And that becomes easier when you have more mandates to say those things. Where in a classical organization, you've been delegated as a leader, you've been delegated specific tasks you're supposed to solve. It's really hard to get passionate about specific tasks. And it's really hard to get other people passionate about specific tasks. So for me, it's like, it's still the classical leadership skills. We're still talking about like empathy is like my top leadership skill of all times, being able to understand other people, but also being able to set those aspirational goals and get people to fired up around those ideas. And then, of course, coaching skills are probably the most valuable skills, because coaching is not something that only happens on like kind of one-to-one basis, like you and me, we book a coaching session. Coaching happens like all the time when you help people solving problems. And the whole essence of coaching is to help them find a solution on their own, so the next time they won't come bother you. So it actually fits really well with most tech people, because we are lazy. This is why we write code, to automate things so we don't have to do them over and over again. So if you view coaching that way, like when you come to me with a problem, I'm going to show you the way to find your own solution. So the next time you'll do that on your own, and you'll come bother me with a different problem, and we'll go through the same thing again. And eventually you'll get better, and you'll get better, and you'll get better. And this is how we as leaders build the people around us. And this is what makes good leaders, I believe.
Yeah, I think it's such an underestimated ability is to take somebody through that process of solving a problem and allow them to feel part of it and feel like they're the one solving the problem, while you're guiding them through the questions that you're asking, and the way that you phrase what you're asking them. Like that is so powerful in changing somebody's mind on
Mm,
something. If you're trying to change the way that somebody thinks about a problem, you can make a statement and hope that that statement sits and stays with them, or you can ask them questions to get them to see the situation from another point of view. And that is just so much more powerful to enable them to change their own perspective rather than trying to force it on
mm,
them. Massively underused skill. Um, so we've talked about this a couple of times, but I really want to nail it a little bit. We've talked about the idea of customer value. We've talked about the idea of doing research. We've talked about making sure that we're actually focused on what we're providing and the value that we're giving people. How do you do that? What are the ways of gaining customer feedback? What are the ways of building that into the
mm.
way we build software, so that it's not an afterthought? In the traditional software development thing, we would do user acceptance testing, where we'd build it all, we'd test it all internally, and then we'd put it in front of the customer and we go, "Do you accept this? Yes or no?"
Yeah.
And
I mean,
really, that's not what we want to be doing with
no.
product.
I mean, this comes back to the whole kind of fail early and fail fast type of mentality, right? So what's the earliest you can fail your hypothesis, is probably what you need to be thinking about. And there's tons of material out there written on this, so there's tons of practices on how it's done. But in general, what we're trying to figure out is we're trying to run two different things in parallel in every team. And one is the kind of the discovery work, which is the work that uses the problem and tries to figure out what types of solutions are going to work. And this is where we usually talk about customer research, and where we want to use mock-ups and prototypes and interviews to kind of nail it in, figure out what is it that's going to work well here. And we want to do that before we start, we shifting those ideas down into delivery. And these are not sequential, they're ongoing. Both of them are ongoing in parallel. And you want to feed those ideas in, the learnings, as they emerge, in order to build that into the product. So specifically, this means that you always have a subset or a few people of the team, or maybe all of the team, a few hours per week, spending on doing some type of discovery work. And discovery work is just a fancy way of saying we're running a bunch of experiments. And I wrote this on LinkedIn and a comment to a different post today, which is, when I talk to my kids about experiments, I tell them it doesn't matter if the experiment, succeeded or failed. Like if it did what if you validated the hypothesis or you didn't validate it, that doesn't matter for experiments, because the value of the experiment is the learning. It's that, now we know something new. Most experiments are not going to play out the way you thought they would. They're going to be, in terms of matching the hypothesis, going to be huge failures, but that's okay, because now you know something new. You can design a better experiment, or you can use those learnings in your product. So that's what we talk about. And I think the important thing here is that I can't stress enough, is when you talk to users, when you gather feedback, when you have user interviews, then remember that users are very in tune with the problems and the pains that they're having, but they're very rarely good at providing solutions for those problems and pains. This comes back from the biggest innovators in time. There's all the way back to, the classical Henry Ford. If I asked my users what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. To, Steve Jobs being, if I went out and asked my users what they wanted, none of them would have said an iPhone. So you have to remember that, believe in the problems, believe in the pains, but don't believe in any of the solutions, because that's what you're for. That's your job, is to come up with the solution. That's not your customer's job. And if you ever seen a product, if you open it, this is probably any type of corporate banking software terminal thing, and there's just a bunch of buttons and menus everywhere, and you're clicking and it doesn't make any sense, and there's three things that do the same thing. That's when you let your customer drive the product development. This is when you took the stuff your customer said and you put it on the backlog and implemented it without questioning whether that was even supposed to make the product or not. So those customer built products that are built, specifically the way that the customer has asked them to be built, they're the most horrible products out there. Those are the products that people don't understand how to use. And there's menus in there that like two people in the whole company use. For what value?
Yeah. We're coming back to value again. Like that's the whole circle that we're going around in this conversation. And that's, for me, is one of the big definers of a product-based approach to this stuff, is we're putting value at the core of every decision we make. And, that should be driving the decisions on what experiments we're running, to what features we're building, to how we're planning what we're doing and what problems we're solving. This, everything has to come down to this value question. And the trade-off between the time something takes to implement and the value it gets, like the time something takes to implement is very, very difficult sometimes to assess, just as the value is very difficult to assess. But if we don't try and assess the value, we're never going to be able to make these decisions. When I was working at Linktree, one of the changes that I was trying to implement and got pretty far down the process of implementing was to shift the way we were thinking about things from an MVP approach to an MVE approach. So everything, rather than going, what's the minimum viable product we could build, I was trying to shift the culture
Mm.
to what's the minimum viable experiment we could
Yeah.
run. Because my answer to a lot of questions on what should we build was we need to gather the data to answer that question. If we don't have the data, if we're ever building something that takes us more than a few days of developer effort, we should have a very clear idea of the value of this thing before we build it. And if we don't know the value, we should be running an experiment to try and give us a sense of the value. That to me was the big shift. It's not about
Mm.
minimum viable product, it's minimum viable experiment.
But I think, I mean, if for the real problems, the solutions are going to kind of happen anyway. And this is something I've reevaluated over the years. When I used to work very early on, when I got my first tech lead assignments, a lot of those projects were um, like rebuilding Excel spreadsheets into web products. And I hated those projects. I was like, this is the dumbest thing ever. Like, why does this Excel spreadsheet even exist? Like, who programs Excel this way? Why would you, like, do this? And now we have to go and figure out the whole Excel logic thingamajiggy, and we have to build that into a multi-tenant type of web application, and nobody understands the complexity of what we're doing, and it was very frustrating. And then, as I moved on, I've noticed that the reason that these Excel programs existed was because there was like a real user problem somewhere. And somebody took, whatever tools they had at hand, which was usually Excel, and they knew how to navigate Excel and how to build complex things in Excel, and used that knowledge to build this rogue product inside of the company. And that rogue product became so good that other people started using it. They started sharing it in a file sharing, other people started using it because it was solving a real user problem. Until they brought in the consultants and were like, hey, we have this thing and it's not scaling anymore. Can you make it scale? At what point, they ran the experiment, but they probably ran it too far. But at that point, you really had the whole value, the whole product locked down. And the reason I probably hated working in that context so much was there was no more discovery left to do. There was no more user interaction. There was no more nothing. It was a clean porting problem because they had already iterated on it so much in the Excel program that they already knew how everything was supposed to be built and everything was supposed to be functional. So our uh, team's mission was not to question any workings or Excel or menus or anything. It was just to, like, take it, move it from the Excel paradigm to the web paradigm. Like, that's the only thing you're supposed to do. And when we wanted more, we wanted customer interactions. We wanted to have planning meetings. We wanted to have feedback. We wanted to do prototypes. And, like, at that point, none of it was actually needed. I think that's interesting how, time kind of gives you a different perspective because it was already validated. It was already out there. It was already solving problems.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, I've been in very similar situations where in my case it was an
Yeah.
access database, and they build up this access database over a number of years, and the project was basically replicate this access database in something that scales. And you're right,
Yeah.
like they've already gone through that process. I think it shows that it's valuable. It shows that it's been useful, but yeah, you're
Yeah.
sucking some of that juice and that joy out of the software development process.
Oh,
We are
in that
rapidly
scenario, and
approaching.
yeah,
Sorry, go on.
I was
No,
just
no,
gonna
go
say, in
on.
that scenario, like, if anything, if you want to bash on anything, it's that, the software development team or the tech team was brought in way too late. Like, because as soon as that was, the initial inkling of the idea was validated with the Excel thing, it should have never went on to become this big ball of mud that you needed to deal with later. So if anything, you might have wanted to cut that experiment short. but it's, it's definitely a better way of working than most projects that, kind of start out with, let's put everything in a spreadsheet, and then we just go down the list until we're at the bottom, and when we're at the bottom, we're done. And it's like, what did we do?
Yeah, 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 totally. We are approaching the top of the hour, so I wanna bring this conversation to a close, and talk about the things that we both got coming up. So from my side, I've got a live stream in a couple of weeks with Nisha. Nisha is an excellent human being, and we're going to talk about being excellent to other human beings. How you can support your team going through life-changing events. This is going to be a really, really great conversation with Nisha. It's something that as leaders we always have to do. There's always stuff happening with the people that we're supporting, whether we're directly managing them or whether we're just supporting them as a non-direct leader. This is something you have to handle with. It's one of the most challenging parts of being a leader, but that doesn't mean it's one you should shirk away from. It's one that you should embrace and handle with as much empathy as you can. So I'm looking forward to that. As always, if you want to know about these events, you can subscribe to me on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. Follow me on LinkedIn if you're watching on LinkedIn. Follow me on Twitch if you're watching on Twitch. If you want to make sure you get notified, subscribe to the newsletter in the link there, which will make sure you get an email whenever there's a live stream. If you want to have a chat with me, please feel free to do that. I made a call out last time, Martin. I've had this 20-minute chat QR code up for about 10 live streams, and only 2 people had actually booked in the 20-minute chat with me. And so I've been pushing this hard at the end of every live stream, and it's eventually happening. I'm getting more and more people booking in 20-minute chats with me. Please, please, please do that. I genuinely love the conversations that I'm having with people. Martin, is there anything you want to send people to? Anywhere you want to direct people, where you can tell them about the good stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, I have a blog at mazur.today. It's coming up with a new version just in a week or so. I'll be live at Developer Week in Germany. I'll be at NDC Oslo. We just got confirmed for Oradev this year as well here in Malmo. So if you're at any of those conferences, feel free to reach out if you want to meet up. Other than that, you can also book me for a chat. Like, very few people actually book me for chats, but just reach out over LinkedIn. I do 20-minute chats with anybody that wants to talk. And other than that, I also have an ambition to start a podcast together with a woman called Ebba Lauren, who's a doctor in management, and we try to take 2 different perspectives on leading in uncertain times. The podcast is called Leading in Flux, and the whole idea behind it is, I'm a 40-year-old white man coming from a tech background. She's a 50-year-old Asian woman coming from a management background. I don't have any formal education. She's a doctor. Between us 2, there's a lot of cool conversations we can have about leadership and leading in uncertain times. So if you're interested in that type of stuff, we have 1 pilot episode out, and I have episode 1 sitting on my computer, that the more people that message me and say like, hey, where's the episode, the sooner it's going to hit. So if you want to hear that, make sure to nag me on social media.
Yeah, everybody bug Martin, because I really want to hear that. I want it to be live as soon as possible. I've got a lot of traveling coming up soon, and so I need as many podcasts as possible for me to listen to, because I'm crossing the world multiple times in the next 3 months, which is not equal parts fun and not fun. So as much entertainment as I've got as possible is going to be hugely valuable. This is the downside of living in Australia. Nobody comes here. We've got to come to you. Cool. Yeah, there you go, Jane. Thank you, Jane. Jane is already booking
thanks,
you.
Jane.
There you go, Martin.
Yeah. All right. Maybe that's a weekend project then.
All right.
Post-production is horrible. If you know anybody that wants to do post-production for a podcast for hugs and fame, like just send them my way. We need somebody to do post because it's driving me nuts.
Yeah, honestly, Martin, this is why I started a live stream, because I tried to do a podcast, realized how difficult it was to do the editing, and then realized that you can just do a live stream and not do any editing.
Sneaky. All right.
Yeah, sneaky. All right, we'll bring that to a close. Thank you again, Martin, for joining me.
Thank you for
I
having
really
me.
enjoyed this discussion. More than welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome. I will see the rest of you next time in a couple of weeks for my chat with Nisha. Thank you, everybody, and have a good evening, good day, good morning, good night, wherever you are around the world. See you later.